To see you all. Good afternoon. Welcome to this session on data-driven transformation in higher education. I just want to make sure you're in the right session and you're in the right Zoom room. Today's session is about inviting participants to use data to contribute to deeper systemic change. And we're going to be diving into a very packed agenda today. My name is Susan Chang. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the Associate Provost for Student Success at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Previously, I was a Senior Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at the Medical School at Georgetown. But we are so excited today, delighted to welcome our two guest speakers to this session who are going to lead us through an amazing session. Both of them are committed to teaching and learning, bridge building between faculty and staff, and a commitment to equity. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Linda Adler-Kassner. She's with the University of California, Santa Barbara. She's the Associate Vice Chancellor for Teaching and Learning and Faculty Director and Professor. Dr. Adler-Kassner is committed to learning and teaching, which are at her core. She's been a writing teacher for more than 30 years, an author, co-author, and co-editor of 12 books and more than 60 articles and book chapters. She's taught undergrad courses like freshman comp and focusing on the study and practice of writing, and graduate courses focus on composition pedagogy, theory, and methodology. More recently, she's worked with faculty to study disciplines to create more equitable, inclusive, and just educational design in the classroom. She also works to create systems and structures of equitable practice within her own institutions and others. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marco Molinaro. Dr. Molinaro is Executive Director for Educational Effectiveness and Analytics at the University of Maryland. This new role involves working with leaders and educators across campus to develop learning analytics at the undergraduate and graduate levels, and supporting campus to use these data systems. Prior to coming to Maryland, Dr. Molinaro served as the Assistant Vice Provost for Educational Effectiveness at UC Davis, where he created and oversaw the Center for Educational Effectiveness, a unit that was focused on empowering instructors and staff, as well as improving educational systems and educational innovation and discovery to maximize learning. Last but not least, we're joined today by Kendall Bryant, who is the Research and Writing Associate with the Red House, who will be assisting us with our breakout Zoom rooms today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our two facilitators because we have a packed agenda today. Please, I encourage you all to drop your questions in the chat box at any time. Kendall and I will be navigating the chat box and presenting that to Linda and Marco today for your consideration. All right, over to you both.
Great, thank you so much. It's wonderful to see everybody, and we can see some people and some people in groups. So thank you for being here, and thank you to Susan and to Kendall for your help. As Susan mentioned, we do have a packed agenda, so I'm going to share our slides and we're going to get going. This will require interaction, including typing interaction on the actual computer, because one of the first things we're going to ask you to do is to put some responses in the chat. So I hope everybody's able to do that. So I'm going to share my screen. Now I have to get everybody back. So one moment, please. I have to move you over here. Isn't this fun hearing somebody navigate their Zoom experience? Okay, put it on slides. Great. Okay, everybody can see the slides? Thumbs up? Great. Okay, so we've had introductions, and this is just an overview of what's going to happen in our session today. Since our session is about using data for change, and a deep change especially, we're going to talk a little bit about a change framework and about ways to think about change. We're going to talk about framing change. We're going to talk about data stories, and then about practical considerations. This is going to be a mix of thinking and talking and hands-on application. So we hope you are, again, ready to participate. And Marco and I will speak quickly and try to keep our speaking speedy and semi-minimal, so there's time for you to do the interaction that you've come for. So the first thing we would love for you to do, if it's possible, is to rename yourself in the, using the 3 dots at the top. So you can include your institution so that we know where you're coming from. And then in the chat, we presume that you're here because you want to change something or you're interested in change. So write a little bit in the chat after you've renamed yourself, just so we know who you are, about what it is that you come for. What is it that you want to change, or what brought you to this session? And we'll give you a couple of minutes for that. Okay. Great. So I see some about collecting and using data, thinking about retention and graduation rates, thinking about language, how to share data to facilitate practices. So those are all great things, and hopefully we will address lots of those things. So thank you for sharing those, and you will come back to those. So please, the chat won't go anywhere, but know that you'll be coming back to those things they've written in the chat as we move through the workshop. Okay, so when we're talking about, everybody okay so far? Let me just check. So far, so good? Good, thumbs up, thank you. So when we're talking about using data and using data for change, we want to think about different kinds of change that can occur in university settings. And for this, we can look to some frameworks that help us think about different kinds of change. And we're going to ask you to sort of keep these frameworks in mind. So as we think about data and change, we're going to think about two sort of theoretical pieces and then some practical applications. The theoretical pieces are this idea of different levels of change and the idea of framing, and then the practical pieces are change. So first, we're going to talk through these different levels. So we can talk about three kinds of change: first order change, second order change, third order change. First order change, as you can see on this slide, is change that takes place within existing structural boundaries. And as people, I'm a person who tends to be sometime in teaching and learning, and this is often the kind of change that gets associated with teaching and learning. These are local interventions or innovations that are designed by one or a few people that are aimed toward a local goal, like improving performance in a course or a series of courses. First order change is relatively easy to identify and assess, especially if it's a pre-post study. So for example, and these are examples from our own website here at UC Santa Barbara, so I'm not pointing any fingers at people. The example in the yellow, it says, this is a platform that provides personalized coaching for students in large, mostly STEM courses to support effective learning and foster self-confidence and self-efficacy. This is a first order change. It's not saying, maybe there are some systemic and structural problems with these courses. It's saying, we want to help people in these courses. And sometimes first order change is really useful. The same thing with the innovation in the blue box. It works with people in courses where there are some significant issues to improve performance of students in those courses. Does that make sense so far? Yes, can I get a thumbs up? Okay, good. Okay, second order change is change that tends to modify structural boundaries. It takes longer, and this is the beginning of deep change. So second order change, for example, is where a coalition forms that wants to change specific policies and practices. For example, changes to course sequences or assessment practices. This requires a shared framework and shared methods across coalitions. And it also requires alignment of implications of policy and application to practice, because otherwise you're going to have spurious correlations. So what you see in the gray and white formatted boxes at the bottom of the slide are some changes to writing placement in the UC system, which used to take place through what we referred to as a ghastly placement exam. But the writing programs over a many year, for the 10-year push, longer, 12-year push, came together, works with the academic senate, the system-wide academic senate, because there are 9 UC undergraduate campuses, to make a change to this placement methodology. So that's an example of second order change. Does that make sense? Also so far? Thank you to, let's see, Logan, to nodding so assertive. Thank you, Logan. Okay, third order change is conscious ongoing awareness of everyone involved in systems, of the structural boundaries and their implications. So third order change is a lot. It requires active engagement by different coalitions through structural boundaries and the implications for strategies, thinking about tactics and goals around these. For example, implementing plans that include changes to policies, course sequencing, practices, pedagogies, people. And it requires shared definitions associated with strategies and alignments of tactics and goals. And so it's not that these things operate independently of each other. They operate together, first, second, and third order change. They operate holistically. Okay, so three levels of change, if that makes sense so far. So we're going to think about those first order, third order, second order, third order change as we think about deep change. Because when it comes to data, it is easiest to lean toward first order change, but deep change is second and third order change. Okay, so next, as we think about deep change, we also have to think about framing. And the people who suggested in the chat contributions that they wanted to think about language are thinking about framing. So deep change works on systems and structures. And systems and structures are also tied into language. So language always reflects and perpetuates different systems and structures. So when we use a word like opportunity or advantage or equity or deficit, it taps into a reservoir of associated experiences, associated connotations, and we'll show you a little bit of these in the next slide. So framing is a process that happens as we use language that makes some ideas seem logical and common sense, and other ideas seem crazy and out of the realm of possible. So if something is outside of a frame, people are going to say, well, that just isn't, it just can't be. Well, that's in part because it's outside of the given frame that has been set for something. So if we think about frames and connotations, we've taken some ideas here from a really, really excellent article called Reframing Educational Outcomes, Moving Beyond Achievement Gaps by Shukla et al. And you can see the author, the beginning of the citation at the corner here. So Shukla et al. Look at these different frames that exist around the idea of achievement gaps, especially in STEM education. And they say, well, if we think about improving outcomes, that's going to lead to certain kinds of frames and connotation, like measurable goals, defined end products, education as a product, knowledge is achievable and definable, information as transmittable and learnable, faculty as vendors, students as consumers. That's maybe not a kind of frame that we love. We could also think about closing equity gaps, but that tends to connote things like student as either quote unquote ready or deficient. And that's maybe not something we love. Knowledge bases as something to be remedied. If somebody, if an equity gap needs to close, we need to remedy something that someone doesn't have. Learning as a baseline goal, gaps as indicators of problems with experiences, or gaps as systemic and personal, but not gaps as personal, not systemic. If we start thinking about increasing opportunity, we can think about opportunity as something that's present or not present. Opportunity as unequal, education as something that provides something to all learners, responsibility for opportunity lying in the system, but not with learners. And then Shukla et al. Say we can think about building foundations of knowledge. That connotes other things, the idea of knowledge, something that everyone has, students having knowledge as an asset that they bring to their learning, and knowledge is something that's linked to experience. So these are some examples of frames: improving outcomes, closing equity gaps, increasing opportunity, or building foundations of knowledge that have connotations and that make things seem possible, logical, and not possible. Okay? Okay, so when we think about using data for change, then we have to think about first order, second order, third order change. We have to think about framing. And that's what we're going to work together on today. So change always needs data. but data alone are insufficient for change. So we have to think about awareness, but then we have to work through this lovely quadrangle that Marco has created for us. Okay. So now we're going to think about your data story. Okay. Everybody good so far? Anybody have any questions before we leap in? Anything in the chat, moderators?
No, we're good.
Okay. Okay. All right. So if you think about a story, any story, but a data story especially, we have to think about parts of a story. So when we think about using data for a story, we have to think about like, who is this story for? Who's the audience? What do we want to tell with this data story we're making here? Who's reading it? What are their interests there? What are their investments? We have to think about actors. Who are the main subjects of the story? Are the main subjects people? And we can think back to the frames. Well, if you put students at the center of the story, that's one frame. If you put the institution at the center of a story, that's another frame, or could be. Structures, a third story, etc. What's the plot of the story? What do the data show is happening, and to whom or to what? So what's going on and what do you want to show? And again, all of these are going to be very important as we think about framing, because it's very easy. And the sort of default data story that we often tell is there's a problem. The students are the subject, and they get made the subject in lots of different ways. Sometimes they're the victim, sometimes they're the subjects, sometimes they're the, but we could say the actor in the story is the institution. We can make it different. There's the frame and there's the outcome. What could lead to deep change? So we have to think about all these elements as we construct a data story. So we're going to ask you now, and Marco's going to put a link in the chat. Oh, he's already done it. So how many of you are here in Teams? Just raise your little virtual hand. Nobody? Nobody's here in a team? Okay, some people are here in Teams. I see. Okay, so 1, 2 teams, is that right? 2 teams. Oh, wait, 3 teams. Wait, clapping, Ohio State clapping. Does that mean you're here as a team, Beth Bentner? Okay, I'm gonna guess yes. Okay, so it looks like we have 3 teams. So Kendall's gonna create some breakout. 4 teams, excellent. Kendall's gonna create breakout rooms. If you're in a team, the whole team should go to one breakout room together. And if you're not in a team, go to so teams 1 through 4, go to breakout rooms 1 through 4, which will leave us, Kendall, how many non-team members for other breakout rooms?
We have 2 more rooms for folks who don't have to.
Thank you, Kendall.
Yep.
Okay, so go to yes, exactly. Go to not rooms 1 through 4 if you are not with a team. And we'd like you to spend about 4 minutes in your teams writing 2 or 3 sentences about a change story you might like to tell. And, try to take one of these data story elements, audiences, actors, plot, frames, outcomes into consideration. And forget the pre-workshop questionnaire, just data story, okay? Make sense? Okay, so we're going to open those breakout rooms, and then we're going to pull you back in 4 minutes.
And feel free to write your story on the actual slide, because it's your
Yes, write it on the slide. It's
and
your
we'll be
slide.
asking you to go through the other slides as we go forward with this presentation.
Just check, can everyone get into the document that Dr. Molinaro put into the chat? Just want to make sure you can get into the document. Great.
I'm going to stop sharing.
Can everybody access the
Oh.
breakout rooms? Do I have to redo it?
There's a hand up from Penn State University Park and one other.
Hello. Either one of you can unmute.
Might just have been them telling us they're a team.
Okay.
And yes, you should create a copy. Yes. Okay, some people are not in a breakout room.
Well, I'm
Yeah,
guessing they
is
don't
everyone
have
able
to.
to access? Okay, looks like some folks are
Penn
joining.
State is in the same room already physically, so they probably don't need a breakout room because
Oh yeah, they don't need a breakout room. That's
a
right.
real room.
It all comes back to me now. Thank you, Marco.
They went to one anyway.
Oh, I'm very confused.
So we will need to send out my timer in about 2 minutes. Is that correct?
About 3, I'd say.
Okay, being generous.
I
Okay.
removed my spotlight. I like to see everybody.
I'm gonna close all the rooms and then I'm gonna try again because it looks like not everybody has access. So I'm gonna just go ahead and try again.
Seems like some rooms have a few people. That's about it.
It's okay, because on this one, we'll need the breakout room for the next breakout time, especially. This one, they're just writing individually. You're just writing individually, but the next time they'll talk. But make them might want to talk this time. Okay, why don't we jump back in, Marco?
And Linda, I think I might just share my screen now because it might be easier.
Good. Yeah, good.
Okay, let me get my screen going. Can people see my screen? Okay, great. Do we have everyone back? Are all the breakout rooms done?
Mhm.
And-
Yes, I
okay,
think everyone's here.
sorry, let me get my, okay. Okay, well, hello, everyone. So I'm gonna actually tell you a story, just like what you're gonna be developing. This is a story that I've been telling for a while, and was developed, probably about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago at UC Davis. And you know, most of our universities tell one main story, and that is, especially when you're a place like a University of California institution, we are a research university that is really full of opportunity for students and contributes to the state and to our diverse population and creates new knowledge. That's kind of the primary story we like to tell. We are the engine of change. And there was a bit of a problem, though. When we started looking at the student success of the students on our campus, we tended to look at like, okay, how are first-gen students doing versus not first-gen? How are low-income students or Pell-eligible students doing compared to not Pell-eligible? How about minoritized students versus non-minoritized? And we always saw that kind of their outcomes in courses and in their first year or, you know, overall in their GPA was always about a third of a grade point gap. And, you know, in general, we tended to say, that's a small gap in terms of GPA. So we're doing great. And really the frame here was how do we improve outcomes and close equity gaps and focus on our students? But the problem was, you know, this third of a grade gap sounds good, but when we start looking at intersecting identities of students, the story became much different. So if you look at this data real quick, up here is the GPA of students after their first year, based on whether they are not first generation or low income, first generation or low income, first generation and low income. And this is their GPA in the top 10 enrollment courses that the students tend to take in their first year. These courses are 8 STEM courses, inter-psychology and inter-English. So what you see here is that our third of a grade point difference, when you start looking at, for example, at these top 10 enrollment courses, you've got this group that is not first gen or low income having about a 3.0 average, the center of the circle. And you've got this group over here having about 2.4. So all of a sudden now, if you happen to be first gen and low income, those things are additive. You've got a third of a grade point difference times 2, and you get 2/3 of a grade. So the gap is starting to be bigger. And we saw this, and we said these gaps are greater in those courses. So we were trying to figure out, what's actually happening in those top 10 enrollment courses. If you look here, all of these grades got suppressed in these top 10 enrollment courses because the grades were lower than what they actually achieved in their first year overall. So we wanted to then see what happens when we add race to this, this analysis. Well, when we add race to this analysis, we start to see a variety of different things. We start to see that our Black and Hispanic students have the most suppressed grades, especially in terms of the top 10 enrollment courses. We see our Asian students have some of the highest grades, and our white Caucasian students have fairly high grades. By the way, this blue line here is a 2.8 GPA, just for reference between the two graphs. And again, this is their first year outcomes, and this is their outcomes in the top 10 enrollment courses. So the other thing we saw in this is that we're not serving very many first-generation low-income white students, but we're serving a lot of Hispanic first-generation low-income students. So we start to see differential outcomes for different groups, where now the difference here between this group here around 3.1 and this group here at 2.2 is almost a full grade. So we're starting to see a stacking of these dimensions that are causing these gaps to be greater. Sorry, I'm going to silence my phone here. So when we looked at this, we didn't want to stop here, because then the story would be, well, we should just not accept students that are below this blue line. So we should not accept our Black students. We should not accept our Hispanic students, a portion of our Asian students, and just our poorest first-gen low-income students that are white. And that is just not an acceptable solution to this problem of how we get students to have better outcomes. So then we asked, when we look at all these things, and we look at the intersection of these 3 different factors that I showed you, what other factors might we need to look at so we can make better sense of what the story really is? We looked at something called the Regional Opportunity Index. In California, there was a study done by the Center for Regional Change. And what they looked at, this is a map of California, what they looked at is a variety of metrics that related to the people that live in a certain geographic zone, and the kind of the amenities, what's available, what are the basic statistics of the place of the given geographic location. And we can start to see that in terms of the people are things like percent of fourth graders that pass English proficiency or are proficient in math, percentage of households who own a home, who commutes 30 minutes or less, percentage of healthy weight babies, involvement in political factors in their environment. How about the air quality? We started to look at all those things, and we put them together to create kind of a aggregated measure called the Regional Opportunity Index. And what you start to see is that some regions have higher or green, higher regional opportunity indices because of the people, and some places like the Central Valley have a lot less opportunity based on the people. And in terms of the place, there's only a few places that have green, and they happen to be around San Francisco and Sacramento, around Los Angeles, there's places, and also around Santa Barbara and San Diego. And this parts look gray because the density is so high that you'd have to zoom in to actually see the colors. But we were able to see this information at the level of a census tract. So a zip code is a larger area, and a census tract is a very small area, just a few blocks. And so we thought, well, we can make an assumption that where students came from in their permanent address relates to where they grew up, and where they grew up had a certain type of opportunity that was associated with them. So we then decided to add this factor into our analysis. And now all of a sudden we have the GPA here, and we have the average opportunity of the group based on their environment where we believe they grew up. And you start to see this very interesting linear relationship, okay? So this is basically showing you that the outcomes of our students are linearly related with their incoming opportunity. So at first, when the audience was hearing the story, they would pat their back and say, wow, we're doing a great job. And then they'd be like, wait a second, we have just maintained incoming opportunity. Even though we're an institution that's supposed to make this dramatic change, improve everyone's social mobility, we have just effectively perpetuated what had already happened to them in the K-12 system. So this was not the story that we want to tell. The other thing we started to see with this is, and you can see these blue rectangles here for reference, you can see that on average, our white students are outside, the majority of them are outside of this low opportunity, low GPA box. But our Black students and our Hispanic students are very heavily, on average, inside of that area that has both low GPA outcomes for the top enrollment courses in their first year, and also the lowest opportunities. So now the goal becomes very different. We can actually aspire to having the outcomes in courses not be tied to your incoming opportunities. Ideally, this would be all random. They would be in a line, right? It wouldn't matter what your incoming opportunity is to how you do. And you wouldn't have such a clear pattern. So, and I want to point out that individuals behave differently than the group. So when you look at individual students, you see that you can have a student with a low opportunity that still does incredibly well. It does happen. There are these yellowish spots up here, fairly low opportunity, that are doing quite well. And there are students that are in the red area, not first general low income, that are doing poorly. So like you see a red spot over here, and there's some red spots hidden over here. So it isn't a stamp on your forehead, right? Your incoming opportunity doesn't dictate where you're going to be, but on average, this is where you're going to end up as a group. And so the incoming opportunity matters to the outcomes that happen in the first year. So at this point, using this more systemic metric, this regional opportunity, allowed us to change the story. And it also allowed us to basically, the faculty, instead of focusing on, oh, well, it's this group of students that's not doing well, they could start to really empathize with the idea that students who have had less opportunity before coming to the university were having a harder time getting those higher grades. And this changed kind of the narrative, changed the way people talked about this, which was very important in getting them more excited about trying to do something about it. We then wanted to see, was Davis the only one in the world that's having this problem? So we compared ourselves with Santa Barbara and UC Irvine, and now you see campus B is one of the campuses, C is the other campus, and D is the third campus. And you see that the story is quite similar across the board. When you have a factor like first gen or low income, or both of those factors, that affects where you appear on the graph. And we still have this issue where some groups are having less opportunity as well as lower outcomes. We did see that one campus, Campus D, seemed to have better outcomes in their top 10 enrollment courses. And one of the things that we, when we dug into this a bit deeper, one of the things that we discovered was that this campus didn't emphasize STEM quite as heavily in their first year. So it had a little bit more diverse group of offerings that students tend to take in their first year, which, by the way, tended to also equate with a better retention into the third year, substantially better retention for minoritized students into the third year. We also used other types of opportunity measures because we wanted to include other institutions, in this case, University of Michigan and Indiana University. And we saw that even when we do that, those campuses, while they are predominantly white serving institutions and do not have many of the other groups, they are still seeing the same kind of pattern, even when we look at other types of opportunity measures. So this is an encouragement that you can think about opportunity measures as a way of getting away from the traditional metrics that we look at that kind of create binary situations. This creates more of a more global kind of metric. So this is not just an issue with a specific discipline or K-12, it's a systemic issue. And so while we're here trying to provide social mobility, we have to acknowledge that we should not be just perpetuating prior opportunity, which tends to be a lot of what we do. And thinking about this transition and what happened in the first year allows us to really work towards more equitable outcomes. And we can start thinking about things as not just a student deficit model or just an instructor deficit model. We can actually think about it as a course or system improvement model. And the story that I told allows us to go in that direction. Okay, so now we'll pass it on.
So Marco's just given us one illustration, a really deep and rich illustration about how we can use data for change and thinking about how we construct these stories. So I'm going to give you a shorter example from UC Santa Barbara now. And I'm going to emphasize especially this idea of framing and how important framing is when we think about these stories. And then we're going to pause for questions and hand it back to you to think about your own stories. So at my campus, UC Santa Barbara, there was a very persistent story that incoming, so we have three undergraduate colleges at UC Santa Barbara, only 3. College of Letters and Science, which admits 97% of undergraduates, the College of Engineering, which admits about 7%, and the tiny College of Creative Studies. Only engineering and CCS admit students by major. College of Letters and Science does not. So the story about undergraduates in the College of Letters and Science is that lots of students left one set of majors, which we called efflux majors in a study that I ran, for other majors at very high rates. And sometimes it was because it wasn't the right major for them. That was the story. Okay, Marco, next slide. So we wanted to think about how to reframe this story through sense-making vehicles. And I won't go into this, but you can read more about sense-making vehicles because I want to catch us up on some time. So next slide. As I said, the frame was these were not the right majors for students, but they didn't know that until they arrived, because students in this existing frame presumably had never understood what, for example, studying biology meant. The reframe that we wanted to think about and advance was that as a minority serving institution, we have a responsibility to support all students as they seek to achieve their commitments and their goals, especially in the College of Letters and Science. Okay, next slide. So we worked a lot on how to reframe this narrative through a study that I ran associated with our reaffirmation of accreditation. And we and this was a very, very intentional reframing. And I worked with a large steering committee, 2 other people led the study, but we used a slide often that Dr. Terrell Morton had shared with us. And Dr. Terrell Morton is a biology educator. And he used this slide in his presentations. And I would say, look, if we run this study this way, we are saying, what's wrong with the fish? Okay, Marco, hit it. But we really need to think about what's wrong with the lake, because it's not just one fish, it's the lake. So this is the frame we really need to think about as we think about this movement of students from efflux majors to influx majors. It's not the students, it's the institution. And I hammered this frame over and over and over again. Okay, next slide. So keep going. We thought a lot about data in the reframe. So I worked with this very large steering committee. We had very regular meetings about framing. Okay, keep going. And we created an index, much like Marco's, called Effectors of Opportunity. And if you went out into a faculty member on my campus and said, what's an effector of opportunity? They would say to you, oh, effector of opportunity, that's that systemic inequity thing. And it affects performance. Now, they wouldn't exactly say these lines, but they would say, yeah, effectors. We've got to think about people's effectors. So this is a very substantial reframe. And it really starts to contribute to deep change when people aren't saying, oh, these students, why don't they know these things? They're saying, oh, yeah, that effector systemic inequity thing, that's big. And so we did it through creating diagrams like this one. And we said, there are 3 primary effectors at play here. There are more, but these are the 3 we're going with. Students who are first generation, low income, and minoritized, who hold these 3 identities. And they are, again, intersectional. Students can have 0, 1, 2, or 3 effectors of opportunity, just as in Marco's data. So you can see this illustrates the campus population at the time of the study, the number of students with different effectors and influx majors and those in influx majors. And influx majors are the ones that students went to after matriculation. And this slide, again, is one that people would be able to say, oh yeah, I remember that slide with the wheels. So communicating a lot with people about these frames is really, really important when we are doing this reframe work. Okay. So we would also create slides like this one that showed probation and major movement. And all you have to do to look at, to see a difference here is say, there's a difference between the bar chart on the left and the bar chart on the right, that blue line is a lot lower than the red line. And we now present all data disaggregated by a factor of opportunity by default. And that leads people to think like, there's a challenge. Okay, Marco. Same thing here. We'd say, there's a correlation between first year student graduation rates and factors of opportunity in particular groupings of majors, okay? And things like probation rates, which is, thank goodness, will no longer be called probation in the UC system as of pretty soon, like maybe the fall. So that too is a big reframes, thinking about the terms that we use for things like this. I think it's going to be called academic review. Because as I always say, people are not in jail when they don't do well in a course. So, but formerly known as probation, the relationship between formerly known as probation and graduation rates, when we say, you know what, there's a very strong relationship here, no matter how many effectors a student comes with. So again, these kinds of data are very powerful when we think about framing and reframing a story. We're not saying with these data, wow, these students, there's something wrong with these students. We're saying, wow, this institution, there is something we have got to provide for these students when we want them to graduate, which we do, and is our responsibility to have them do. Okay, keep going. Okay, so this diagram also is one that people on my campus could pretty much quote you, not chapter and verse, but they could say, oh yeah, that multiple levels thing. We can't just work at the level of students and instructors. And I would say, look, most of the time we work at the level of students and instructors. We say, we've got to provide more support for students in those intro STEM classes. That's where we know they need help. Well, sure, but we know they need help because the classes, for a whole variety of reasons that have very little to do with the people teaching them, are not especially equitable. Like, they're enormous. And the California Master Plan dictates that they are large, and there's all kinds of challenges we don't need to go into. So we need to think about policies, practices, course systems, course structures, all kinds of things. Okay, next animation piece, Marco. So the story is, oh, no, go back, sorry, back. Systemic change is necessary. That's the story. It requires working at all levels, and data tell us where we can most productively focus our attention and activities, especially in resource-constrained environments. Now, whether you can use the word equity in your systems or not, and we can, and equity is very important in the California system. It's not allowed in some states. All campuses are very invested in persistence and retention. And so our story is rooted in, we want to have more students graduate. So we know we can do that if we focus our activities on the first 6 quarters of enrollment in efflux majors and in belonging and persistence across pre-majors. Okay, next animation, Marco. Hit that space bar. Always focus your story on what you want, not what you don't want. So often we focus on what we don't want. No, 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 no. You want to say what you want. Okay, next slide. Okay, now, we really are going to send you back to your breakout rooms now for 8 minutes. And this is probably after, well, actually, we're going to send you to questions before we do this, but we're going to show you what's going to happen. When you go back to your breakout rooms, we're going to ask you to think about your story. You've got a little bit of a start. Hopefully you're thinking about some data. What's the frame you want to use to shape your story? What do you want to say and see happen in that doing? Okay, before you do that though, what questions, what clarifications, what anythings before we send you off?
Okay, so then we wanted to say, tell you a little bit more about what data can we use in some of this work that we're doing and where can you find it? So,
and then we'll share. That was my mistake.
Then we'll share out, because there's another slide that you guys said before we share. So just things to think about. You can look at things at the individual student level. You can look at data at the course level, at the sequence of courses, at the major college campus, and you can even look at post-college outcomes. And these are some potential measures that you can use. Grades we're very familiar with, DFW or AB rates, if you want to look at more thriving, so-called thriving. But you can also look at things like how they're using your learning management system. Some things that are less often used are things like thriving, belonging, mindset, and inclusion. So these blue ones in here are more either qualitative or more challenging to come across. And these are some of the different dimensions that you can look at and also think about intersections. One thing to keep in mind, you can go quite a bit deeper if you want to start doing some research on what's happening in your classrooms. And this is from that Shukla paper that was mentioned earlier, just some other things that you can think about. And also when you're looking at any of this type of data, you just have to be very well aware of FERPA regulations and institutional research regulations. In general, FERPA regulations, all they say is you can use any data for institutional improvement, but that does not give you the right to take that data and share it with others or publish it. That requires this IRB. So if you're creating generalizable knowledge and you're trying to take what you've learned and pass it on to others, you better also seek IRB approval. Don't let people tell you you can't do data work because FERPA forbids it. It is meant to actually say you should use data to improve outcomes locally. So don't let people block you with that. The other thing is, where's the data? So there's data in the academic side, and we're going to make these slides available to you. So I'm not going to go through all the details here, but just to realize that there's many different places where you can get data that'll help you understand what's happening with your students. And they can really range from, in blue here, the really common ones that we tend to use, but there's many others. You can even think about student affairs data. You can think about medical data, things outside like a National Student Clearinghouse, Alumni Association data, things of that nature, depending on what kind of access you have. And you can think about things as internships and volunteer work, things of that nature, and also financial aid, military, lots of different types of data when you're thinking about this work. You will find data roadblocks. If you guys don't find data roadblocks, tell me, because I can rejoice. There'll be one institution that I've heard of that doesn't have data roadblocks. I would love to have that sample. But again, there's a variety of different things. There's a lot of worries that you will risk exposing sensitive data or unflattering data, because there's a lot of fear that data will be used to judge people or judge departments or judge institutions. So you have to think a lot about this and create community around this usage of data. There's also often a lot of leadership change or instability. So you have to make sure that you have multiple administrators on your side with data use. Who owns the data is often a common problem. And I put some suggestions here that you'll be able to read as ways of trying to get around it and trying to help clarify what you're trying to work on. The technical infrastructure can be a big issue, like who actually holds the data. On most institutions that I've interacted with, it's a bit haphazard. There's lots of really valuable data that's tied up in spreadsheets, and then there's data that's tied up in databases, but often not the same database. There's sometimes different naming conventions. The data can be dirty in terms of, there might be duplicates, or there might be things that are written in different ways. Cybersecurity is a big issue nowadays. In general, you're going to find out that data about students' Pell eligibility is not accessible. That's going to be the case 90 to 95% of the time. Very few institutions have direct access to Pell eligibility. You can find proxies, and I'm happy to talk to people in consulting hours if people want to think about proxies for that. There's also usually admissions. If you happen to be in a four-year university, there's a lot of worries about admissions being second-guessed when you have access to data. Why did you admit these students? Those types of issues. But you can avoid that by really making sure that you talk about the value that your analyses and your data access will bring. And then, of course, all of us are faced with staffing limitations. What can you actually get done? Who can you get it done with? So with that, we're going to send you off into your next and close to last slide. And you have about—
And not for 8 minutes.
Not for 8 minutes.
Not for 8 minutes.
For what? 5?
Sure.
Okay.
5, and then questions.
Okay, so go ahead. Start working on your slide 4.
3. Slide 3.
I think it's already slide 4, isn't it? Oh, no, it's slide 3. Oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. Oh, it's written right there.
All right, creating the breakouts one more time.
That was such a great idea to put the numbers there, and then I forgot to use them.
Okay. Great, thank you. Okay, so now we really will ask you to share out some of your something that you have developed when we have asked you to go to your breakout rooms. That could be a messy start on your data story, some questions that you have about it, or anything else that you have thought about that you would like to share for the good of the group as we have worked on these questions for the last some number of minutes. Who would like to kick us off? Don't be shy or we will point at you in this Zoom box. Okay, I'm going to start calling names if nobody starts speaking or raising a hand.
Logan really seems like he wants to go. I don't know.
Do you want to go, Logan? Logan does want to go. I think he's trying to, but they can't unmute. Okay, while they figure out their tech, Penn State Harrisburg, how about you? Oh, they got it. All right.
Yeah, we're
PSU
here.
College of IST. Okay.
Yeah. Hi.
The speaker and maybe just mute yours.
Yeah, mine is muted. Echo.
Okay.
Hello. Okay, great.
Good.
No, it's
Okay.
still coming from above.
Can you, Alan, can you turn the volume down, please?
Hello. Okay, great. Hi. So I've my team here. We've been thinking about learning analytics. So we specifically have our project is to figure out a way to, one, make faculty aware that they may have first generation students in their courses, but two, also give them some sort of best practices or deliver some sort of actionable information that they can use to affect change or to scaffold their instruction. And so we have at our institution a tool that is built within Canvas that is a learning analytics tool that helps faculty understand the type, using data, helps faculty understand a variety of different types of data points that are in their specific classes. One thing that this idea that we could identify not specific first gen students, but that there are first gen students present in a course, it would kind of raise a flag in the form of like an info card. And so we wanted to, but we also wanted to give that information about what could be done to change instruction for that student. And so largely what we did was, we feel pretty good about our project. We tried to reframe it, and the way we kind of reframed it to ourselves is kind of working through the slides that you had. We know that our audience is all faculty who are using the learning analytics tool, but which also have first gen, and so really it's just going to be all faculty to some degree. We said our actor is that same faculty because we're trying to figure out how they get to use the data. And then, so I guess the way we framed it, but with the way we framed it is we could focus on the faculty, and that's who we're trying to serve in this case. But behind that, we're trying to serve the students. So we reframed it to this sentence here: first generation students can benefit from increased instructional support from faculty in courses. And so this kind of removes a little bit of the tool focus that we were thinking on and really just, I guess, centers it back to the action that we want to take around the problem or yeah, right. I don't want to say
the population that we want to
the
benefit.
population that we want to benefit. Thank you. Sorry, I just want to, and I guess, so when going to slide 3, we're thinking about data we need, where we find it, etc. So in order to create this info card, we really just need student information system data that'll help us know who first generation students are. And then beyond that, we were thinking, how do we evaluate the effort or the adoption here? And so there's two different types of data that we could collect. One is user data from the learning analytic tool, clicks and how often they're viewing and whatnot, but also focus groups for anecdotal data, specifically to see how do faculty feel about the information that's being given to them about what they can do for first gen. And I'm finished.
Okay. So how about I'll start, Marco, and then you can jump in. I'll have to go as fast as I can because I know we're almost out of time. So great. Yeah. Wonderful idea. Things I think about is hopefully you have access to some data indicating students' generational status. On my campus, that happens at the time of admission. 2, the frame that you're using does put the action burden on faculty. And so one thing I would think about is it an institutional responsibility to support first generation students? And if it is, how does that happen as an institutional project, as well as, faculty are certainly part of an institution. 3, love using learning analytics data, and Marco and I have had lots of discussions about learning analytics data. Learning analytics data is great for first order change, and it so great. It doesn't go much beyond that. And 4, tying it into actionable guidance. So Marco, who can share more, created a platform called Know Your Student at UC Davis that many people have copied, including us, and ours is called Detailed Data Enhanced Teaching and Learning, that enables faculty to get a demographic snapshot of students in their courses at the time of enrollment. It's tied in with our student information system, and our platform is tied in with they're called CITRAL, Center for Innovative Teaching, Research and Learning, research-based strategies for action that we have on our website. So they are tied in with strategies for action. We also have a course equity report that faculty can get. That's a much better version of this, and that's through a project called SELC. Marco, what is SELC? I can't remember what it stands for.
STEM Equity Learning Communities.
Yeah, STEM Equity Learning Communities. That's a project that Marco and us are part of. So that provides, so there are lots of ways you can do this. Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
and
Marco, what else would you add?
Yeah, so those are all fantastic. In general, you're going to find that you can find some advice that's tailored to a specific variable, you might want to call it. In general, though, the advice is pretty consistent.
Yep.
Good teaching with
Good
design,
teaching benefits.
backward design teaching for, universal design for learning. Those things are kind of like standard. They're kind of like the advice you'd give in any of these. And the main thing I notice with first gen is just the reality that students don't know how to navigate the really complex Byzantine systems that we have. And they don't necessarily, the first gen students don't necessarily have access to all these other networks, like, networks not only of their own families, but also networks of others to know that, oh, go to the frat house or the sorority house and get the old exams, do this, do that. They don't necessarily have that access. But it's the kind of thing where first gen is just the beginning of the, you're taking like you're sinking your teeth in the apple, but there's way more to it than just first gen. You're going to find that first gen often comes coupled with other things, other variables, including could be low socioeconomics, could be minoritized, and those things tend to aggregate together. So, just be aware that it's a good start.
I'm going to give, and I'm going to give you one more.
There's good t-shirts. Like there's been a whole bunch of different things about making faculty identifying that they're first gen as well. So like ask me a question if you're first gen, there's a whole bunch of different things that you can also do.
I'm going to point out, give one more piece of advice. Think about when you're thinking about what to do in the moment, which is great. Think about what's the change you want to see, because thinking about the change you want to see, if you say, well, the assessment measure we're going to use is, we're going to use more LMS clicks as a measure of engagement. That's not what you want to see. You want to see a greater sense of belonging and improved academic performance on the part of first-generation students. That's clicks does not equal engagement. So think about the change you want to see and build your deep change data infused project for the change you want to see. And the assessment that you build will get you, assessment always drives what's going to happen in the change-making process.
In the UC system, there was a big push to just making first gen really normalizing first gen and
Yep.
kind of making sure that people would connect on first gen at multiple levels. And that was
Yeah.
kind of Knight's overall approach to looking at the bigger change that's needed. And then you could bring in all those other factors as well into that conversation. Okay, I guess we have time for one more. Well, we don't really have time for any more, but we're into some kind of other time that people are talking about things. So
I know I have coaching at blocked off for my next time, but I don't think anybody signed up for it. So I'm happy to stay. I'm going to look at my email, but yeah, so if anybody wants to chat, I'm happy to do that.
anyone else want to report out? Looks like we have a very active Penn State in 2 different locations.
I mean, I can make a suggestion. We also identified first gen as a population at our campus at Altoona, which is, which has a higher percentage of first gen students than University Park does. And what we actually did, and this is a benefit of enrollment decline, is that we were able to change a position of an academic advisor to a student success advocate. She's a first gen student herself. She established Tri Alpha chapter, which is the honor society for first generation students on our campus. She connected our support services to the other support services that are more likely to be accessed by this population of students. So there's a financial and family life skills center at University Park, which will provide resources to any campus of Penn State. So we have a collection of books related to that. It's also within, so there's something called Elevate at Penn State, which is a tool through Starfish, which we use for advising, which it actually is connected to Canvas and Top Hat and Kaltura, that gives you an overview of engagement, and you can use that in combination with Starfish activity to try to identify students that are, so trying those inter semester data points that help us sort of identify students earlier than when they get grades and they end up on academic warning. So the student success advocate has been trying to mine this data to a more proactive approach in reaching out to students. And this just happened within the last 8 months. So we're still sort of evolving and learning how to work together in a new success center structure. But I think having a person outside of faculty who can be a supplementary or complementary support for any population of interest would be beneficial, because it's a lot to ask faculty to also be, delivering their courses and then sort of trying to mine who's struggling. And not that it's asking too much, but that having some sort of infrastructure in place to be supportive and not relying on any single individual, I think has been effective. And what we've seen, I've done a project with our Division for Undergraduate Studies, which is responsible for advising for the entire university. We see students that see advisors more than twice are much, twice or 2 or more times are much less likely. I think their retention rate across the university is like 95 to 96%, and the other population is in the 70s. So we know that engagement is we assume that engagement's beneficial. I know there's other effects there that could be mediating, but we're trying to create more opportunities for that engagement through the creation of this position.
Fantastic.
So much, Linda and Marco, for an amazing presentation. I know a lot of people learned a lot. I'm gonna
Yes.
stop
Thanks,
the
Susan and
recording.
Kendall.